What's up, webheads? I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and today I'm going to be continuing my series of reviews on all of the live-action Spider-Man movies. I started off, with the original Sam Raimi trilogy with Tobey Maguire, and now I'm into the Andrew Garfield series. Last week I did The Amazing Spider-Man 1. Now this week's video is all about The Amazing Spider-Man 2, so let's get into it. Now, if you haven't seen any of my other live-action Spider-Man reviews, the reason I'm doing this is because, the newest MCU Spider-Man, Spider-Man No Way Home, will be coming out in theaters in a few weeks at this point, and we know that movie is going to feature a lot of crossovers from all of the previous Spider-Man movies. We've seen, like, the Green Goblin from the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, a couple characters from the Amazing Spider-Man series, as well as probably some returning from, the MCU Tom Holland Spider-Man. So I figured I'd go back and watch all those videos again, or all those movies again, and then give my thoughts on each one of them as we get closer and closer to that one. And then, of course, I will be including No Way Home in that as well. So I know a lot of people don't really like this Spider-Man movie just because, there's a lot of different reasons, I guess. It wasn't as popular of a Spider-Man movie as some of the previous ones. Like even the first one, the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. I think I said this in my review. I said I like how it was unique and it gave us a sort of backstory on why Peter lives with his aunt and uncle instead of like with his parents. Like what happened to his parents. They kind of tied that into the story, and they continue that in this movie. But the problem I saw with this movie was that they tried to do too much at once, which was the problem with the original Spider-Man 3 movie as well. If you've ever seen that, they tried to cram like 3 different villain stories into one movie. You had the whole Sandman thing, and then Venom was in it, plus Harry Osborn, wanting revenge on Peter and Spider-Man and everything else. So it's like they tried to cram too much into one movie, and I kind of fixed that in my review. I said they could have just had Venom, or have Harry become Venom, and the symbiote latch to him and everything else. They kind of had a similar problem in this movie as well, because they had, they wanted to make Electro, I guess, the main villain of this, but then they also brought in Harry Osborn, who we hadn't seen at this point yet in even in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. Like, all we knew was that, Oscorp exists, because it played a big part in the first movie. That's where Peter got bit by the spider in the first place. But we hear a reference to Norman Osborn, but we don't actually ever see him in the first one. In the second one, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, we do get to see Norman Osborn and why he's, like, sick and everything else. He has what he calls the Osborn curse, which is some disease that all Osborns have had, I guess, over the years, and it's genetic and everything else. And we see Harry Osborn actually show up in this movie as well to confront his father before he passes away and stuff. Like, his father tells him, or gives him some kind of file, like, here's all the information about my research on our disease and how to cure it and everything else. And that kind of ties back into what they were doing in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie with Dr. Connors. Like, they were trying to do cross-species genetics to see if the blood from animals could help Norman, or just help people in general, I guess, is what that project was all about. Now, while there was nothing wrong with the way they did this, I think this should have just been the central focus of this movie, because as it turns out, Spider-Man's blood, or Peter Parker's blood, is what Harry thinks he needs to heal himself of his disease, because it originated from Oscorp, the experiments they did on the spiders in the first place, which we found out, because Peter got bit by one of the spiders from Oscorp, and that's how he got his powers. The experiments that they were doing with the spiders is what actually could have cured Harry or even Norman Osborn of their disease. So you kind of get that tension there where, like, we find out, that Peter and Harry were friends before Harry went away for a while. I guess he was shipped off to boarding school or something when he was 11. I guess they've known each other for a while. We don't really get much of a backstory on that either. They could have played into that more, I feel like, as well. That was kind of a problem. like in the Sam Raimi trilogy, you find out right away who everybody is, like Harry Osborn is Peter's best friend and everything else. But in this one, it's kind of like, here's Harry Osborn. Yeah, he was friends with Peter in the past or whatever, but that's a problem they could have, easily fixed. Just kind of tell a backstory for that and stuff. Maybe if you need more time for that, get rid of the Electro stuff. I don't feel he needed to be in this movie, honestly. But they kind of played that as like, because Peter is Harry's friend, he would find Spider-Man for him, because they even kind of had, or Peter takes pictures of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle in this one, although we never really see him go to the Daily Bugle, or he just kind of emails his pictures to them, to Jameson and everything else. So Harry kind of thinks that Peter knows Spider-Man, like, can you get him to come to me so that I can get some of his blood and heal myself? And like, Peter doesn't want to help him because he thinks it might not work, it might make things worse and everything else, so he doesn't want to help him. And then later on, Harry finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. So they had that whole thing going, but they also kind of tried to make Max Dillon, or Electro, played by Jamie Foxx, they tried to make him also the villain, and I feel like all of that stuff could have been saved for another movie. Like, they basically made two movies in one. They probably knew it was going to fail or something, or they probably suspected it wasn't going to make it as much as like the original trilogy of Spider-Man movies did. It wasn't going to be as popular, so they kind of crammed everything together. I personally think Electro didn't need to be in this movie, because they could have focused more on the relationship with Harry and Peter, and that struggle of like, he doesn't want to help Harry, or he doesn't want to give Harry his blood because it might make things worse, and that just makes Harry investigate it further, and ends up actually finding the secret lab in Oscorp where he injects himself with the secret spider DNA that they had, because he found out they actually extracted the venom from the spiders when they were told to shut down the program so they could still keep running it secretly. So he injects himself with it, and it actually does make it worse for him, but he goes after Spider-Man eventually, everything else. They had all this in that movie, it's just they crammed it in with this Electro stuff as well, and that's kind of what took me out of it, I think, and kind of ruined it. I would have rather seen either Electro is the villain or the Harry stuff, like one or the other, not both. The one thing I feel they did do a good job with, though, with the Harry Osborn thing, is that like they kind of took a different route to the Green Goblin, because Norman Osborn in this series doesn't become the Green Goblin. Technically, Harry does. And it's because of that illness, the Osborn curse, as they call it. It kind of turns him insane and everything else, and he kind of gets these, like, his fingernails grow. And like, that happened to his father, too. When his father died, his fingernails were growing. He was kind of goblin-like by the end of his life. So I kind of like that was a little bit different, because they made him like an actual goblin. And then the suit that he gets with the glider and everything is actually to sort of heal him, I guess, because it says like healing process started when he gets in it, because he finds that down in the lab after he gets injected with it and everything else. So like, they took a different approach to the Green Goblin, which I kind of liked that. I thought it was unique, and it made it seem more like he is a goblin, just like the Lizard was a more real villain, whereas in the original Spider-Man trilogy, other than like Venom and Sandman, we didn't have those like sort of supernatural like villains. Like in this one, he's an actual goblin, he's an actual lizard. In the original, he wasn't. Doc Ock didn't turn into an actual octopus, things like that, but it was still, he was known as Dr. Octopus. So I like that they tried to take a different approach to that, just like they did in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, with Peter's backstory and everything else. They tried to go with this mystery and things like that. And that took a different approach from what we were used to seeing from the Sam Raimi trilogy. So they tried to be different, but I feel like they did too much in this movie all at once. And they even added in the stuff where Peter's still trying to find out what happened to his parents, why they left him and everything else. And we do find out that his dad's blood was actually used on their experiments with the spiders, which is barely referenced, honestly, in this movie. They could have done a better job of like making that a bigger deal. Like, that's why the DNA from the spider bite sort of works on Peter and gives him his powers, because it's his father's DNA that is in the spider that bites him, essentially. So it was kind of, they didn't really, it was kind of like a passing thing. Like, once Peter figures out his father's like secrets and everything else, and then they just kind of move on from that. Like, it didn't feel as big of a deal as it could have been, because I feel like they were trying to throw everything together in case this movie was popular enough where they could make a third one, I guess, is what they were going for. I just feel like they knew it was going to fail. Like I said, there was too much crammed into this movie at once. It didn't feel as big of a deal. It didn't have a huge payoff. Like, that's why his father went into hiding and everything else. It was just kind of like, okay, we found that out. Now let's move on. So I feel like they could have done a better job with concluding that, if this was meant to be the conclusion to that. So that was the biggest issue with this movie, was they tried to cram everything into one thing. If they had taken out the Electro stuff and focused more on the relationship with Harry and Peter, and kind of gave us more of a backstory of their friendship 10 years ago, or however long it was between when he last saw Harry, I feel like it would have been a much more decent movie, and it maybe could have allowed them to make a third one. Or even if they had included the Electro stuff and made that the second movie, and then the focus on the Harry stuff in a third one. Like, I feel like taking it out and separating it would have made the movie a lot better. But it's not like it was unwatchable. But let me know what you guys thought of this movie down in the comments section if you've seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And also be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Starting next week, probably 2 days in a row, I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man Homecoming, and then Far From Home, and then the week after that will be when No Way Home comes out, so I'll be talking about that as well. And then following that, at some point, I'll do a comparison of every live-action Spider-Man movie, and I will be including the animated movie, I guess, Into the Spider-Verse, because it was theatrically released, but it's not really considered live-action. But I'll include that in there as well, or I might even do a review of that. If you want to see that, let me know that down in the comments section as well. Thank you for watching the video, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe.